If you haven't figured it out yet, my topic this morning is gay marriage. And it's being talked about all over the airwaves, and people are having conversations all around. It's important. And I realize that it's a subject that makes some people uncomfortable. Because talk of gay marriage makes people think of gay sex, and thinking of gay sex makes some people very uncomfortable. Now, to be honest, if I think or try to imagine most of you married people having sex, that makes me really uncomfortable. It makes me very uncomfortable, but I still support your right to be married. This is an enormously important issue, and it should not be driven by anyone's discomfort about what two people do in the privacy of their own home. This is not ultimately about sex. This is about family and love and what is best for the children and society and what is best for the institution of marriage itself. Now, if I thought that same-sex marriage would harm marriage, children, or society, I would be the first in line to get up into this pulpit and speak out against it. And so I ask, especially to those who have these concerns, that I just ask you to seriously consider the points that I have to bring forward on this subject this morning. First of all, let's start with the most basic. Same-gender loving people are not going away. All right? No matter how much, same gender loving people are not going away. No matter how much some people wish for it, we will never return back to the 1940s and 50s when gay people lived hidden in the shadows of society. Nobody's going back into those closets. It's not going to happen. The science and the research has shown us again and again that a small percentage of society is homosexual, and there is nothing that they can do about it, even if they wanted to, and many have tried. People who are attracted to people of the same gender will continue to fall in love, will continue to form couples, and will continue to do so more and more openly in our society. Homosexuality is a fact of life, and it always has been. Do you realize that same-sex marriage is now legal in Spain, Argentina, Iceland, Brazil, Belgium, Norway, Sweden, South Africa, Portugal, the Netherlands, Mexico, and Canada? It's also legal in 7 states in the United States, plus the District of Columbia. It's legal in Iowa. So plus municipalities, even in states where same-sex marriage is not, marriage equality it does not happen, there's still, those governments have found ways to support, many have to support partner benefits and legal rights for gay and lesbian people and bisexual and transgender people, and so have almost every major corporation in this country, and a growing majority of Americans say that they support equality for gay and lesbian people. So LGBT people, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people are our neighbors, our friends, our brothers and sisters, our children, our fathers, our mothers, our doctors, our police officers, our lawyers, our politicians, and yes, even our ministers. And the truth is, they always have been. We just didn't know it or didn't want to talk about it. People in denial need to realize the fact that gay Americans are here to stay and are one small part of the beautiful and ornate human mosaic of life. And like all people, LGBT people are worthy of love and support and free and full equality and freedom. Now, when we realize that from now on, There will always be gay couples and families taking part in our communities and societies. The question becomes, how best can we support all individuals and all families to live healthy and productive lives like we all want to do, and we all want our children to be able to do? Now, this is personal for me as a minister because I've been with same-sex couples at births and deaths and celebrations and sorrows in their lives, just as I have been with heterosexual couples. My experience has made the discrimination against these families much more real and painful. I've not only seen the families hurt financially by unfair tax and inheritance laws, but I've talked with partners who've been denied access to his loved one during a medical emergency because he was not considered legally to be family. I've watched the family of a female partner of over 20 years who cared for her lover every day through a debilitating illness, and the family did not want to mention her in the memorial service or let her sit with the family at the funeral. Not in this church, though, I'll tell you. Never in this church would that happen. I've seen this injustice and prejudice up close, and I am outraged. It's time to support the legal and equal rights of LGBT people, and one of those rights is marriage. So let's talk about marriage for a minute. It's both a religious and a civil institution. As a religious institution, it has various rituals and rules and restrictions depending on what tradition you come from. It's also very much a civil institution, and while the religious rules might vary, all marriages in this country are governed by the civil laws of the land, which are the same for all. Now let's take an example. The Catholic Church's rules about marriage do not permit contraception or divorce. Okay, if you're Roman Catholic, you can follow those doctrinal rules by personal conscience, but no one is legally bound by our government to follow those rules. In fact, we are probably the most religiously pluralistic country in the world right now, and yet some clergy and politicians try to argue that we are and should be a Christian nation. And I ask, if so, which Christian doctrines should we use to create our laws? Now, there are over 70 million Roman Catholics in America. They are not only the largest group of Christians in this country, by far, but they are also the largest single faith group in America. So does that mean that the doctrine of no divorce and no contraception should be the law of this land? Most Americans would disagree, including the millions of Catholics who've gotten divorced and use contraception in this country. The point is that what makes our democracy so strong and our religion so free is that no one is forced by our government to follow anyone else's religion. And our religions are free to practice their faith within the vast freedoms of the law. The government is here to provide equality under the law to all of our citizens. It doesn't matter what religion the most of the members of our country come from, whether it's Catholic or Mormon or Muslim. We must never let religious doctrines dictate the laws and restrict the freedoms of our citizens. It doesn't matter which religion has the most members in this country, whether it's Catholic or Mormon or Muslim. We must never let religious doctrines dictate our laws and restrict our freedoms. What this means is that no religion could be compelled by our government to marry same-gender loving people if it conflicts with their beliefs. But at the same time, if it becomes laws, those religions that agree can marry same-gender couples. Now, right now in Oklahoma, it's a felony to officiate a same-sex wedding. Now, every time our ministers perform one, we can be fined $500 and be subjected to no less than 1 year in prison. But we've been performing them for almost 30 years in this congregation, but these couples do not receive any legal rights as a married couple in this state or country, but so far no one's gone to jail. With the recent vote against marriage equality in North Carolina, there have been a lot of Christian leaders, including Billy Graham, saying that the Bible is clear that the message about marriage is that marriage is between one man and one woman. The Bible is clear. Now, Mitt Romney has weighed in saying that he is sticking with 3,000 years of tradition, that marriage is between one man and one woman. Now, I don't know what Bible these men are reading, and Mitt Romney needs a history lesson. Let's look at the Bible and 3,000 years of marriage. Now, Jacob in the Bible had 2 wives, Leah and Rachel, and 2 concubines, Bilhah and Zilpah. He has 12 sons by these 4 women who became the patriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, according to the Bible, God approved of and ordained Jacob's family because he was eventually renamed Israel and made the father of his nation. Now, the most revered king in the Bible, David, had 14 wives. He also slept with Uriah's wife. Sometimes you never have enough. And then David had Uriah killed so that he could marry her. Now, according to the Bible, God so clearly approved of this biblical family that it says the Messiah shall come from David's family, and Christians believe the Messiah did come from this family. The Bible says King Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Now, he's known as the wisest man. I just wonder how he had time to do anything. The Bible also says that if a man dies without heirs, his brother is required to marry the widow and produce offspring. That's Genesis chapter 38. According to the Bible law, according to God's law in the Bible, in Deuteronomy chapter 21, women could be kidnapped during war and forced into marriage. That's part of biblical traditional laws about marriage. Not to mention that an unmarried woman who had been raped was required to marry her attacker. That's Deuteronomy chapter 22, another traditional biblical marriage. Jesus, of course, took his disciples away from their families, never married, most of them never married. But so many Christian clergy today say the Bible is clear about traditional marriage, and it's between one man and one woman. Now, as for Mr. Romney, sticking with 3,000 years of history, for most of European history, marriage was primarily a business arrangement between 2 families who arranged the marriage of their children. Here in the United States, before the 1850s, it was illegal in most states for slaves to marry. It also used to be legal for a husband to beat and rape his wife. In the court ruling in Virginia, barely 50 years ago, the judge denied a couple an interracial marriage, which was illegal in most states at the time. We're talking 50 years ago. In his ruling, he, like many today, claimed to know what God intended about marriage. He stated in this official court document, Almighty God created the races white, black, yellow, Malay, and red, and he placed them on separate continents. And but for the interference with this arrangement, there'd be no cause for such marriage. The fact that he separated the races shows that he did not intend for the races to mix. I'm glad to say that the Supreme Court later unanimously threw out that ruling. And it was in 1967 that interracial marriage became legal in the United States of America. The point is that we have redefined marriage many, many times in many, many significant ways over the past 3,000 years and even over the past 50 years. And most of us would agree that it was a good thing. And it's time, once again, for us to redefine it. To make the laws of marriage more fair and equal, as we have been doing decade after decade in this nation. And there is nothing at all unprecedented about it. I heard one legislator recently on the news, I hear this kind of stuff all the time, saying, what's next? Are we going to let people marry their pet turtles too if they love them? Right? Same gender loving people are not asking for any rights that heterosexual people don't already have. And heterosexual couples, if you haven't heard, can't marry their pets or children for that matter. And same gender loving couples don't want to either. The issue is whether two legally consenting adults can choose to be married in this country, and whether their relationships and their families deserve the same support and protections that every other family has. Now, I used to think that as long as we came up with something like civil unions and gave the same protections to same-gender couples that married couples have, that would be okay, and that we could preserve the word marriage and the title marriage for others. But my viewpoint on this has evolved. And here's why. I've realized that allowing same-sex marriage is actually the best way to protect the institution of marriage itself. In his book called Gay Marriage, author Jonathan Rauch makes a salient argument that if we start to create new types of legal arrangements for gay couples, what he calls marriage light, then these legal arrangements, civil unions, etc., cannot be denied to heterosexual couples as well who want them in this country. So guess what? Already there is a precipitous drop in marriage rates in the United States as more and more couples decide to live together and not get married. Now, if couples are given options that give them the rights and the protections of marriage without the full responsibilities and obligations, it's likely that more and more heterosexual couples will prefer that option as well. Instead of American children growing up with the expectation of marriage, they would grow up with an assortment of non-marriage options and legal arrangements that they might choose from. Now, how long before young people start to say, oh, you have a traditional marriage? How quaint. The best way to preserve and to protect marriage and all that it means and that it offers to our society is to create not to create new legal forms, but to open up marriage to same-gender loving couples. Marriage is an extremely important institution in our society for the care of one another in sickness and in health. If people don't have a family, who takes care of them? Right? It falls to their neighbors or their coworkers or the state. Who else besides a spouse is legally and morally, emotionally, and economically there when a person has a stroke or a debilitating illness or a breakdown or loses their job? Marriage offers one of society's most fundamental units of care and support. That's why it's an enormous obligation, it's an enormous commitment, and it's an enormous challenge. And that's why, rightfully, in this country, we offer married couples so much support in our laws, in our tax codes, and in so many different ways, socially and culturally, so that they will be successful because society relies on those strong units of support. Our communities and future generations depend heavily on strong families, and supporting marriage equality is the only way to ensure a strong future for the institution of marriage in this country. Now, what's interesting, and John Rauch points this out, is that LGBT people have gone from advocating for LGBT rights to advocating for LGBT responsibility, right? At first, LGBT folks simply wanted the legal right to be able to have sex, to walk down the street in safety, and to hold a job. And now their focus is on taking responsibilities such as marriage, military service, and rearing and mentoring the young. We should be supporting this movement for responsibility. For those of us who are in this congregation, this is not an abstract issue, because our beloved associate minister, Reverend Tamara Labach, and her wife, Jill, have been together for more years than my wife and I have been together. They're going on 17 years. They have a home and a child and so much more. They both have service-oriented jobs. They are active parts of our church and our wider community, but they cannot be legally married. Now, fortunately, our church's health coverage is through our national denominational office, and therefore, Jill is covered as Tamara's partner. But as I learned researching this sermon, she's not covered on the dental insurance. There are so many legal and tax advantages that heterosexual marriage automatically confer that cost couples like Tamara and Jill a lot of money to replicate, and some can't be replicated at all. And this is unfair, discriminatory, and wrong. Yes. Now, legal marriage would fix all of those inequalities with the signing of a pen. But also, and most importantly, it matters when it comes to their daughter, Beckett. Even though they are both her parents, Tamara is her biological mother. Since they are not legally married in Oklahoma, if something were to happen to Tamara, Jill has no legal rights to her own daughter. Think about that. Tamara cannot put her in her will because children are not like soup spoons. They cannot be willed to another person. In situations like this, despite being a child's parent for years and years and years, in Oklahoma, the biological father and his family have more rights than the child's mother. Now, believe it or not, in this state, even a completely anonymous sperm donor has more rights, and that anonymous sperm donor's family have more rights in Oklahoma than the mother of a child in this situation that's not the biological mother. That's just not okay. Now, of course, Jill cannot adopt Beckett in Oklahoma unless Tamara were to give up her parental rights, which would defeat the entire purpose, right? And this would never happen between these two, but if they broke up, Jill would have absolutely no rights to the visitation of her own daughter. Now, this is the case with tens of thousands of children and families all over America today. And it has to stop. As a nation, we have to take our heads out of the sand and create legislation that give equal protection under the law to all Americans. One person recently pointed out, isn't it ironic that the strongest lobbying against marriage equality is coming from the Roman Catholic Church hierarchy and the Mormons, and I'd like to add, also from many African American church leaders. Now, the Catholic Church hierarchy are officially celibate and unmarried. Now, pardon me saying this, but they seem like an unlikely group to be dictating this country's marriage laws. Now, the Mormon Church was instrumental in funding Proposition 8 in California to block marriage equality in that state. Now, they seem so hell-bent on what they call traditional marriage, but their most revered prophet, Brigham Young, after whom they named their most prestigious university, he had 55 wives, and he had children with 16 of them. Now, when Mitt Romney says he's sticking with 3,000 years of tradition in marriage, it makes you wonder what in the world he's talking about. And then the strong opposition of many African American church leaders is among the most heartbreaking. Now, let me just say that fortunately many of the most revered African American clergy are coming out day in and day out right now in support of the president's position on marriage equality. For example, a giant of the civil rights movement, the Reverend Joseph Lowry, who delivered the benediction at President Obama's inauguration, he's come out. The Dr. Raphael Warnock, Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock, who serves in Martin Luther King Jr.'s former congregation, Ebenezer Baptist in Atlanta, Georgia, Otis Moss III at Chicago's Trinity Church. Of course, our own Bishop Carlton Pearson has been on CNN twice in the last 2 weeks, speaking out for marriage equality. And Reverend Gerald Davis here has been a pioneer for marriage equality in this community. But that said, there is still a strong voice coming from the African American clergy in America against marriage equality and against the inclusion of LGBT people into the full rights of American society. Now, they are using the Bible to make their case, and it's particularly sad because of the long history of white preachers using the Bible to subjugate and discriminate against African Americans. Bible verses were used to outlaw a slave's ability to marry. We used to support the entire institution of slavery, and it's not hard. If you read the Bible literally, God clearly ordained slavery as a way to organize human societies. It's in there, it's all over there, and so we have to just deal with that if we're going to be literal about our translation of the Bible, and it's been used that way. Verses were used to keep slave families from marrying, used to block interracial marriage all the way up until 40 years ago in this country. That these preachers are using the same tactics to suppress LGBT people's rights is a particularly sad moment in African American churches that have been known to be a bastion of liberation in this nation. I want to quote extensively here from Michael Eric Dyson, who's a professor at Georgetown University and a prominent African American author and commentator and a Baptist minister for 30 years. And he said last week on the Ed Lacey show, "We must not use the Bible to create more enemies of the faith, but to use our faith to create more friends with the least and the lost and the lonely. My Bible tells me Jesus said, you should love the Lord with all your heart and all your mind and all your soul and love thy neighbor as yourself." There are no asterisks on what Jesus said. Except gay people, except lesbian people, except bisexual and transgender people. Do we really want to use the Bible in the same way it was used against us? Many white Christians, believing that they were under the Spirit of God and the anointment of their faith, believed that black people should be marginalized, second-class citizens, put out of the church, refused entree, not given communion because they were not human. They were not Christian, and therefore they were not their brothers and sisters. They cited biblical texts to justify their bigotry. Do we want to become sexual rednecks, he says? Do we want to extend the same trajectory of transgression and tragic suppression of the belief and faith of GLBT people? Do we want to stand on the wrong side of history because we have a narrow, parochial, provincial conception of faith? I call upon all of my friends and clergymen and clergywomen and people of faith and thinkers and prominent African American people to stand against this kind of bigotry. Come on, put down your covering and sanctification of bigotry in the name of faith when all you're doing is getting God to co-sign your bigotry. Let's be bigger than the bigotry. Let's stand above the provincial and the narrow and call upon the faith of our fathers and our mothers to release and to free those who are oppressed and not to reinforce their oppression. That's what Dyson has to say on the subject. Discrimination and bigotry and inequality are always bad for children, bad for society, and bad for everyone. Marriage equality is good for gays, it's good for straights, it's good for marriage, and it's good for America. So let's support it. God bless you.